Stray is not really a game I gave a fuck about prior to release. In fact, the only reason I got it in the end was to make a video on it because of its popularity. It was clear it was going to be another pretentious, self-indulgent indie cringe fest. And to make matters worse, the developers are French, so you just know they think that their art has to have some sort of important message to it. And though this game certainly has many of these qualities, it's more of a light fog than a full-blown hailstorm of "aren't I so profound?" that many indie games fall into the trap of. So with this game doing the nigh impossible of creating a French indie cat game that doesn't make me cringe out of my skin, I started to soften on it and give the game a bit of a chance. So after getting physically beaten and dragged across the floor by the internet to play this game, what I found was a mildly enjoyable, if incredibly unambitious project. Now you might be wondering why even bother doing a critical analysis of a game that clearly wasn't made to be a masterpiece or anything. To me, it's about what this game could have been if they were willing to make the effort, because I actually see a lot of potential in this game that almost never gets fulfilled. I'm not going to be pedantic about its shallow flaws, nor am I going to pretend that this startup studio has the resources to make some sort of grand adventure. There's always room for a more ambitious sequel, after all. However, the sequel usually resembles the original in format and genre, and they could certainly have made a better opening pitch than a walking simulator. I believe this could have been a great puzzle adventure game if they wanted it to, but instead they chose to play it safe and just rely on people buying the cute cat game. With all of that said, let's look at this a little deeper. I generally see there being 6 main elements to a game. Different genres focus more on one than the other, but they all tend to have most of them in some form. First is mind, strategy, puzzles, planning, problem solving in general. Second is body, frenetics, action, reaction, something to keep you moving or doing something. Third is soul. This is all about aesthetics, the environment and its contents, the music and the ambience, and even the set pieces and the cutscenes. Fourth is a combination of mind and soul, the story. Fifth combines the body and soul, exploration. And finally, the 6th element is the message, as in the politics and philosophy the game evokes. Aesthetics, story, and message are all things you see in other mediums like films and books. So the 3 main things that you can center your game around mechanically are action, problem solving, or exploration. If you don't have any of these, it's less of a game and more of an interactive movie at that point. So applying this to Stray, yes, there are some vague action running sequences, and it does have some of the most painfully simple puzzles I have ever encountered in a video game. But it's clear these weren't the focus. Stray, at the end of the day, is a walking simulator, with the main focus being on exploration. The game does have great environments for you to navigate. The 2 main cities have plenty of alleyways, buildings, and rooftops to explore. The means of doing so is also engaging as you jump from platform to platform to reach tucked away areas. However, one of my main problems with this part of the game is that a lot of the exploration led to nothing. I got all of the buttons and memories, so I definitely didn't miss anything. There are many times that I would see a potential path that is unreachable, or jump across platforms that are just there for the sake of being there. Of course, not everything has to lead to something, but I found myself more often disappointed than rewarded. The first city area isn't as bad in this regard, since you have so many things to collect and quests to complete, but the other 2 are nearly barren. Outside of the cities, they do try to have some exploration as well, but it ends up just being something like turning left and going to the end of the hallway for a memory. Aside from that, these mission zones are entirely linear and rely on simple puzzles and chase scenes. There's also the fact that everything is way too simple. The paths you can explore are pretty obvious, and and there's almost always just one way to get somewhere. This is a shame because they could have leaned into the idea of a cat being able to find its way into small places that others can't get to. Most of the exploration you do is jumping onto things rather than squeezing through tight spaces. They could have had winding ventilation shafts, multiple pathways to reach the same area, and places in the environment that you could only reach from other locations. An example of this is that you need to get onto a ceiling light, which you could then use to enter a locked room through a ventilation opening near the ceiling. You can't reach it with the existing surroundings, but you see a hole in the ceiling that you could jump down from onto the light. You could then leave that room to find a way to get to that hole, or find the keys or code to the door in a discreetly hidden location. This is a very basic game concept, and Stray has the assets to design environments like this. And this is before you even take into account the extra tools you could have at your disposal. This brings us to puzzles. Again, the problem is simplicity. Oh, there's a fan, with a battery plugged into the wall right next to it. I wonder what I'm supposed to do. Why even have that at that point? At least have the battery in another location and have it in a difficult to reach spot. Or have it covered by a glass case and you need to find a way to break it. These are not difficult to implement and would at least spare me the eye-rolling and heavy sigh whenever I come across something like this. They could have had more complex puzzles that actually make you think if they utilized the environment more. There are some mild interactions with the environment, like pushing over a plank of wood to walk across a gap, but they're all incredibly obvious. Unfortunately, most of the environment you see isn't interactable. You can push over bottles and supplies, and even knock down some moving robots, but none of this actually does anything. They just give you an achievement for kicking a ball into a tire. An easy way to create more complex puzzles is to make use of the physics engine. You could give your floating robot the ability to pick up items, hold them, and either throw them or set them down. Perhaps you can charge up for a more forceful throw to increase the distance. Give the cat the ability to do some of these as well to a lesser extent. Obviously its mouth can't fit around a bottle, so there would be more restrictions for the cat. These two additions alone would be enough to dramatically increase the possibility for puzzles. You could have the cat push a plank of wood onto a pile of bricks or something to make a seesaw. There would be a bucket on a frail rope hung right above one of the ends. You could then have the cat get on the other side of the plank while the robot puts bricks into the bucket until the rope breaks. The bucket would hit the plank and send the cat flying into an open window of a nearby building. If the cat isn't on it at the time, you can now jump up a path to reach the roof from the tip of the now unmoving plank. This would lead you down two different routes into the same building. It would also be pretty hilarious if you get to the rooftop without using the bucket, and when the cat jumps into the bucket to ride it back down, the rope snaps and you fall and die and you have to start over again. This is just a simple example of what you can do to make things more interesting. You could unlock these abilities through some minor quest in the first city. Perhaps you increase the weight of objects that can be picked up by the robot through quest upgrades. These are not taxing changes, there are already assets for the cat and robot picking objects up and setting them down. For the robot holding something, it just needs to float in the air in front of him. Throwing items just requires adjustments to the force and direction of the object. And all you really need for additional quests is a few lines of text dialogue on existing characters. These are not difficult to implement and would dramatically improve the game in my opinion. Now, the action in Stray is acceptable for what the devs were aiming for with this game. It largely consists of chase sequences where the cat runs away from parasitic blob things called Zerk. The main strategy here is to zigzag back and forth at the right time, which works quite effectively. It's not particularly difficult, but the speed of the Zerk allows them to catch you if you're not doing well with your timing. It doesn't need to be difficult, it just needs to be engaging. And I think the game does this better when using the Zerk for small actiony puzzles. In the first mission area, you have to lure the Zerk into jumping at you near a hole or near the edge of a building so they fall off and die. This combination of action and problem solving is far more engaging than just zigzagging for a few seconds. Unfortunately, in the very next mission, you get a laser gun to blow them all up, and it just becomes boring after that. I think it would have been better if you fired AoE shots and had time windows between each round, rather than a constant beam of death. I think they had the right idea, it's just a matter of a few balancing tweaks. After the Zerk section, the rest of the game focuses more on stealth. These stealth sections are, again, fine for what they're going for. They're simple detection-evasion puzzles that add some variety. Though I will say that considering how fast the cat is, the floating robot sentinels should really be quicker to respond. They're so slow that in some cases you can just run past all of the sentinels unharmed, even when they detect you. Just make them start zapping you immediately upon detection and it should be good. And when you need to lure them into places, you can still dodge the zaps. Now, I didn't think this game needed boss fights at all until it straight up presents you with a very obvious boss arena. But then, psych, it's just a cheesy cutscene and another chase sequence that I've already done plenty of times. I would not be surprised if this was cut content considering how blatant it is. It's not great to tease the players like this as it leaves them disappointed. Perhaps they had some issues on figuring out how to design it, so I thought I would give my thoughts on what they can do in this regard. First, this game really only needs 2 bosses. One at the midpoint and one near the end. The midpoint boss would obviously be this giant eye creature near the end of the 3rd mission. Here, the path forward past the boss could be blocked by biological matter, and when you enter the arena, a similar barrier forms to block where you came from. A cutscene plays where the eye opens to rumble the place, which brings out a flow of Zerk from the pipes in the walls, and the fight begins. Have some rods holding the platform to the ceiling with some Zerk eggs clinging to them. The cat would run around evading the Zerk and shooting them with the laser gun thing. Once they're all defeated, the eye opens up again to summon more and closes immediately after. What you need to do here is blow up the Zerk eggs on a rod, which will cause a section of the rod to fall down into the arena, as the biomatter was holding it together. Once the eye opens again, you use the robot to pick up a rod and launch it into the unprotected eye, ideally at full charge for more damage. Do this a couple times to kill it. But don't destroy too many of the rods, because if you do, the platform collapses and you fall and die. Once you kill the eye, the biomatter deteriorates and you can proceed. But when you make it to the other side, the platform collapses due to the deteriorating biomatter. This causes a rumble, attracting more Zerk, and the final chase sequence begins. I think this is a pretty good proposal that incorporates mechanics I added earlier in the video. Obviously, this would be more work than the other changes, but I think it would be worth it. If they needed to, they could always cut one of the mini chase sequences. The other boss battle near the end of the game would be less complex. Here, you could just have a robot guard with a zappy baton. He would be faster than your average robot, so he still poses a threat. Have the fight in a room with pillars and building supplies. You beat him by having the cat take the end of a rope and wrap it around 2 or more pillars to cause the guard to trip and fall. You then have your robot pick up bricks to pelt him with. If you throw them at him while he's standing, he just dodges out of the way. Do this a few times and he dies. Not as spectacular, but it fits the theme of a prison break. These 2 bosses would be nice for variety and offers a fun climax to the end of both halves of the game. The story of Stray is pretty straightforward. The cat falls down into an underground city, finds a floating robot that wants to get to the surface, and you work your way through challenges to get there. You're a simple creature with simple motivations. You want to find your friends again, so the premise fits well with the theme. Along your adventure, you learn more about the city, the robots living in it, the strange parasitic creatures wreaking havoc, and what happened to all the humans. This information is mostly gained through memories and dialogue with some robots. This format of lore discovery works well. You're a cat, so you're not going to care to learn things on your own. Rather, your curiosity leads you to happen upon new information, again fitting with the theme of being a cat. My one big issue with the story is that it's told in a painfully cheesy and corny way. It seems like a poor attempt at camp with the silliness of much of the game, but they put too much seriousness and self-importance in it that it just comes across as kitsch. The cutscenes are overly dramatic, trying to be all emotional and serious in a fundamentally unserious game. It makes it seem incredibly artificial and try-hard. On top of that, for some reason they decided to make your floaty robot friend emo, as he constantly gets emotional or reflective every time you find a new memory. The main problem here is the dialogue. I think if they gave the robot more of a dry personality, it would flow a lot better with the silliness of the game. Deadpan humor tends to work well with robots. You can look to the Portal games who do this best. It would also allow you to talk about more serious themes without you coming across as pretentious, as you don't take yourself too seriously on these topics. You still make your point, but in a more subtle and less cringy manner. But of course, we know why they wanted to insert unnecessary emotion, which brings us to the messaging of this game. Robots are people too, you know. They have emotions and act like humans. Also, humanity's bad and should go away. And capitalism's bad too. Just let the past go. Robots are the future, man. Now, there's nothing wrong with having these messages in your game if they're what you believe in. The problem arises in the execution. They are not subtle with their messaging at all. In most cases, they just straight up tell you what to think in dialogue. They have your robot friend constantly talking about, hey, you know those robots you see walking around town? Did you know they started mimicking human actions? Why no, I didn't notice. It's not like I can see them drinking in bars, playing games, or tending to shops all over the place. I really needed you to spell this out for me 12 different times throughout the game. They could have just let the environment do the talking for them, but they really needed to make sure you got the precise point that they were trying to make. All this did was make the game more preachy when it didn't need to be. They then go outside of the main message of the game of robots are people too, and start throwing random topics at you so fast that they don't even bother to make an argument for them. An example of this is that they use the term capitalistic greed and just assume that the audience already agrees with them. There's no case made in any form at any point in the game. It's just an assertion. It's also way too blunt. He could have easily just said greed, so it doesn't stand out like a sore thumb, explicitly denouncing a particular economic system. The other main problem with their messaging is that they act like these are important messages to raise awareness of important issues. They seem to think they're being profound, despite the fact that every modern piece of media dealing with these topics makes these same exact points. If you're not original, stop pretending that you are. You just come across as self-righteous and pretentious. Overall, a good rule of thumb when weaving a message into your product is to be subtle and avoid being preachy. This allows people who disagree with you to enjoy your product while exposing them to your point of view in a subtle manner. The one part of Stray that I'm universally positive on is the game's aesthetic. It reminds me a lot of Portal 2 with the underground facilities, going through the remnants of human civilization who built this massive labyrinth. It evokes the brilliance of humanity to build something this grand, and the tragedy that they're now gone, their creation falling into disrepair, but with the activity of machines creating the illusion of life. The relative darkness, neon lights, and oriental influences also adds a bit of a cyberpunk feel to the game. The music goes well with the visuals, adding a hollow, lonely, and dystopian atmosphere. Then there's the upper city area. Here it's more classically cyberpunk. Things are less run down and gives you a glimpse at what life was like in the city before the collapse. It's portrayed as a police state now, as the guards control everything. Given that the guards have no new instructions from their long-dead makers, their programming loops, leading to nonsensical situations. It's definitely a lot more busy and less atmospheric in this part of the game, but I think it fits the adventure that they're going for. Going from the slums to the city and finally to the surface sees a gradual increase in the technological capacity and a decrease in the damage sustained by time. I still prefer the first half of the game to the second half, but it's nice to see the full spectrum of what the city looks like. I have no suggestions to offer. They did a fantastic job here. This brings me to my main contention. An exploration game with little to no problem solving or action in it isn't a game at all. Sure, you can't literally explore the environments of films or books, but you could still imagine it in your mind. Given this, I would argue that though exploration is an important element in many games, it still needs either action or problem solving to really make it distinct from other mediums. Now, I'm not saying Stray isn't a game. It clearly has some action and puzzles in it, but these elements weren't given proper attention. I gave my various suggestions on how it could have been better, but how would I rate it as is? I don't mean to play into stereotypes here, but this game was clearly marketed as a way to get your girlfriend into video games. Doesn't mean that's going to appeal to everyone, but that is how it was marketed. Given this, we would compare Stray to similar starter games that may appeal to the same audience. There are many other games that I would suggest over this one based on this criteria. Stray is more of an experiential game that is better suited to someone who is already familiar with games in general. Starting off with something that is so mechanically shallow would give the false impression that games are supposed to do everything for you. This would then turn them off to more mechanically complex games in the future, as that's not what they're used to. Overall, I would score Stray at a 6 out of 10. It's really only above the average because of its phenomenal aesthetics. Outside of that, this game doesn't do anything special. Now, let's be clear, Stray isn't a bad game. I liked it quite a bit, and it's perfectly acceptable for what it's aiming to achieve. It's just that the devs were aiming pretty low, and many of us have higher standards than that. Ultimately, Stray is a moderately enjoyable 10 hours experience, but I think your time and money is better spent elsewhere. Thank you all very much for watching, and have a nice day.